right. Believe we are live. I see some people showing up. I feel like I'm on Instagram live right now or something. I'm like greeting our fans. We'll let a few people show up here before I jump fully in. Um, so yes, hi Chris, how are you doing?
Doing great.
I'm Jamie Bradley. I will just be introducing Chris here in a second and taking your questions. But welcome to today's presentation, the inside scoop on onboarding, the latest strategies to get new reps up to speed and thriving lightning fast. As I mentioned, I'm here with Chris O'Connor. He is our head of sales development here at Ambition, and we'll sort of walk you through why we're talking about this, what we've learned, and why we're kind of qualified, I guess, to be giving this advice, because we've gone through a lot of change really quickly on our side. So yeah, I'll do some housekeeping. So we will send the recording out. We always do. So if you missed, need to hop off, or you are missing this and you're wanting it, you will get that via email either later today or tomorrow from me. So do not worry there. Also, you're muted, but please type questions into the chat. I will be monitoring that as we go through today. But without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to Mr. O'Connor to explain why are we talking about onboarding?
Yeah, good question. Well, thanks for everybody for showing up today. Really excited about this topic in general. I feel like there's been a lot of chatter recently around, people have their initiatives for the new year. There's a lot of hiring going on. So how the heck do we onboard folks remotely? And so the background on why we're talking about this subject is that in January, we decided that we really needed to accelerate the growth of our self-development team. And it wasn't necessarily because it was my initiative or our VP of sales, but because our internal data scientist said, hey, I'm looking at the data from 2020, and it says that this model is working. And so we need to start accelerating growth in this area. And so very quickly, we took our team of 5 outbound reps to 10. So March 1st, we brought on a cohort of 5 new reps. And so what we're going to be talking about specifically today is what we did to take those 5 reps, to scale, onboard them quickly, as all of them were remote, really all over the country.
And one of my favorite tidbits is, I believe, I watched this happen from afar over Slack, but Chris was on vacation actually when I think a lot of these people accepted their offers, and I don't think he got to rest on that one. So it's been a fun, kind of wild ride, I think, over the past few months, but I'm really excited for you to enlighten us on how that all went.
Certainly. So yeah, let's go ahead and dig right in. So, and Jamie mentioned it, but if you have questions throughout, please pop those into the chat. We'd love to address those in real time if possible. All right, so how I've organized some of my strategies and tips here is just in a list of 10. So number 1, if possible, hiring in cohorts is the best way to do it. And so, like I mentioned, we brought 5 on at the same time. And so obviously this is a lot easier for the organization to be able to go through this process once as opposed to multiple times. But it's also really, really beneficial for your reps to be able to onboard with the group, right? So that they have a chance to learn from each other. Everybody brings in different background and experiences. They can support one another in those tough times. But then we'll talk about this later. They also get a chance to compete with one another, which is also very valuable in this process. So definitely, if you can hire in a cohort, we'll talk about a little bit more specifics about that here in a minute. But then the other thing that I feel like is specific to onboarding remotely is you really have to get creative about how do we connect them with other team members? How do we connect them to the organization so that they feel like this is replicating the in-office experience? Can't always do that perfectly, but you have to get creative. So I've thrown in a couple examples here one that worked really well for us is creating kind of like a buddy system or a mentoring program where you connect a new SDR with a veteran on the team. And so we had 5 and 5 veterans and 5 new ones. So it worked out really easily to connect them. And they meet on a weekly basis and, either just, connect and learn more about each other. They can do shadowing, they can do role playing. But that really worked out well for us. Another thing that we did outside of the work is just to make sure that they feel like they get to know others in the organization. So one really cool thing we did is called welcome wagons. And so we have team leads throughout the company that would organize these different chats where there would be a specific topic, say, if you got to travel, after COVID to anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? And that really fostered a connectedness that was really important for these new hires.
And the welcome wagons are fun. Like I'm a captain on the marketing team of one of the welcome wagons. And so each one of mine is always, would you rather? So I just find the dumbest, grossest, questions, and it is a good icebreaker and it's super fun. But yeah, I love that. And I really loved that sort of happening as a result of us bringing this SDR cohort on. Because now we do it for everyone that we hire, not just in sales, because it was so successful. So it was really, it was a nice multiplier.
Yeah, and every day the SDRs are meeting with one another, but they don't often get a chance to meet the software engineers or the CXOs. So that was very valuable for them to get very early on.
That's so cool.
All right, the second point, and I would argue this might be the most critical of any of my points. So we'll spend some time here.
So listen up.
yeah, this is the meat. So map out what good looks like. So it's very important that you have clear expectations with your SDRs about, again, what good looks like on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And how we do that at Ambition, these are screenshots you're seeing here from inside of Ambition, but you can accomplish this as well if you aren't using Ambition, although it's a lot easier if you are. So on the left side of the screen, this is going to be really important, is the activity scorecard. So these are typically metrics that your reps have a lot of control over. So while they're onboarding and they're not having a ton of success on the outcome side of things, it's really important that you focus on, in order to get those outcomes, you really have to focus on these inputs. And so for us, those are things like calls, call connects, talk time on those calls, prospects added into a sequence, their emails, their LinkedIn connections. And then also, you'll see here in this screenshot, this is an activity scorecard for a ramped rep. And so it's going to add in that meeting set. But my suggestion would be to have these activity scorecards evolve over the life cycle of the new rep, right? Because they're going to be able to do more and do better as they continue to onboard. So I would say look at an activity scorecard on a weekly basis and say, in week 2, when they start making their first dials, this is what good looks like on a daily basis. And then in week 2, week 3, week 4, all of those numbers are more than likely going to increase. And we, in month 2, we would have all of our new reps on our full ramped activity scorecard. So they quickly get to full ramp on activities. But then we move over onto the right side, and that's the objective scorecard. So this is their quota metric. And for us, that's meetings held. And so we look at ramp for that on a 3-month basis. So in the first month, their expectation is 2. Month 2, it's 6. And then month 3, they get them to the full 10, which is quota. So I think it's just really important here that, it's a lot easier when you're in office with your reps to tell them, hey, you're doing a good job, you're on track. But in the remote setting, I think it's so much more important that you be very clear about, on a daily basis, this is exactly what you need to do to set yourself up for success.
And you may dig into this later, so I hope I'm not scooping you, but what I think was unique, at least in my time that I've been at Ambition, is that these SDRs are all over the place. Like we traditionally, prior to this, prior to COVID, probably would have kept things a little closer to where our headquarters are located for the SDRs. And that was sort of our first class. I think when you were here, everyone was in either Chattanooga or Nashville, Tennessee, but we've got people from all over the place. I mean, it's LA, New York. So this is a vital component, and it's been really fun on the Ambition front, for me to be able to see in Slack, all these triggers sort of firing off, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I get to follow along and see how they're doing too, which has been really cool.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We are, completely remote all over the country, West Coast, East Coast. And so this just helps set exactly what the standard you want to see from all your reps, and then hold them accountable to that. And then once you have both of these activity scorecards and objective scorecards dialed in, that's going to make it easier for you to run competitions. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. But Jamie's right. With Ambition, the triggers that are going off are also just helping to celebrate those early wins for these reps. So while they're not, setting a bunch of pipeline in week 2, they're hitting their daily activity scores and getting rewarded for that. And that definitely feels good.
Absolutely.
All right. So let us know if you have any specific questions on the activity or objective scorecards. Happy to address that in more depth, but we'll keep moving on here. The third piece I think is really, really also important is having a really strict playbook. Okay. So what I mean by that is take the thinking out of the day for the most part for your brand new reps. They're just learning the product, the buyer personas, the ICPs. And so it's very beneficial to go ahead and have a strict email sequence for them, the templates built out. Certainly as we teach them more about personalization, they're going to dive into that. But they shouldn't have to think too much when it comes to their prospecting and their outbound, just being really clear with what good looks like. And you can take that from some of your veteran reps. And so I think that was an important part for us is early on, I wanted them to focus on the phone conversations and getting really good with that as they learn more about the product, and not having to worry about, is this subject line, going to be best? Should I switch it to this? We're going to go with the subject lines and the email templates that have performed best over time for us. And then after those reps get really comfortable with how to sell the product, we kind of take the reins off and let them be a little bit more creative in their outreach and build their own sequences, things like that. So that worked really well for us early on, and I would certainly suggest that for others that are onboarding new reps.
No, and that's a great idea, and it just seems much less chaotic for you to make sure, okay, here's a constant, and then we can focus iteratively on that. I love it.
Yeah, and again, you're using data there, so you're looking at what has historically worked from an outbound standpoint. Get those in the hands of the new reps. How we did it was we gave them 4 different sequences based on the personas that they're reaching out to, and said, run with those 4 sequences. We'll add more later as needed. So that was very helpful getting folks onboarded. The fourth point that I make here is really, doing everything we can to nail the communication gap. As we mentioned, we've got reps all over the country. You've got to be very intentional about staying connected, keeping everyone on the same page. And so I would suggest as much video as you can. I know we all get Zoom fatigue every once in a while, but use video as much as you can. We even transitioned at some point to making like FaceTime calls. That was helpful as well if you're away from your computer. So I would just say, just really nail down what's your communication strategy throughout the week. Obviously, you want to have a very set cadence for your one-on-ones throughout the week. So kind of how a look into what we do is we have set one-on-ones with myself with every rep for 30 minutes per week. We also have a 30-minute call coaching session every week. And then very early on for the brand new reps, I'm blocking off 2 to 3 hours per day just to run through our playbook, to do role playing, things like that. But then as you get going and they're doing more outreach, we started weekly stand-ups. So 3 days a week, typically in the morning, and it's only for 15 minutes. So we don't want to block off too much meeting time, but we do want to make sure that we create that forum for answering quick questions if people have them. We also, as I mentioned here, had to create East Coast stand-ups and West Coast stand-ups because schedules are going to be very different for those two coasts.
And then if you're Chris, you try to find time to like eat and sleep and do all the kinds of things. Well, and I was going to ask too, I know in the sort of sales leader with AEs who are later in the, in the sales process, it's really common for, let's say, a senior leader or an executive to get on the phone with a decision maker and, that kind of thing. Like that's really common. But how often during this process are you kind of riding shotgun with them, or are you ever just sort of a silent partner in the conversations? Like, I know you do a ton of role playing, but what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. We'll talk about it on the next slide.
Okay, sorry.
Role playing is huge for us. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But also we use outreach for making all of our calls, and they allow you to listen in to phone conversations. And so what I'll do is do a call block with a rep, listen to their calls. If there is the opportunity to coach live during the call, I'll do that via Slack. Say, hey, you might want to mention this. Sometimes that's nerve-wracking for the reps, but others that works well. Otherwise, we would just take that recording afterwards and really dive deep into the mechanics of the call and figure out what we might have done better.
Cool. All right, tell us about role playing, my favorite.
I really think this is another huge key to success for early on for reps, and we do it every single day. So they're role playing with their peers, they're role playing with me. We even have guest speakers sometimes. I'll reach out to a peer who's at a different company and say, hey, do you mind if one of my reps gives you a cold call?
I love that.
We're truly not trying to sell you here, but I want them to have that live fire example, some of those real objections from buyer personas that they are going to be calling. And so another specific tactic here is, and I've done this wrong so many times, but please don't role play the full call, because then you're going to be trying to perfect, 5, 6, 7 different things on each play. And it's really hard to do that well. And so I would say break up different scenarios within the call and just drill that scenario multiple times. So the number one scenario for me is really nailing that first 30 seconds of the call, having a really confident intro. That's going to be the most important thing to buy yourself more time on the cold call. And so we will drill that first 30 seconds multiple times.
Is there, in that first 30 seconds, is there sort of a script-ish, or do you let each of them make it their own? Or is it sort of like, here's what I think it is as your leader? Like what does that first 30 seconds kind of entail?
Yeah, similar to our playbooks around the sequences and the email templates, we do have a call script that works really well. And we have them start with that and really get comfortable pitching that, because, I'm a big proponent of, really within that first 30 seconds, not everyone is listening to every word that you say, but they're keying into your tone and how do they feel. How are you making them feel in that first 30 seconds? And that will determine whether they give you another 30 seconds. And so we really drill one script, and then focus a lot on the tone and the different mechanics that you're using in that delivery. And then once they get really dialed in with that, we'll say, hey, get creative, add some
Clear.
Yeah.
some sparkle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's the number one thing with role playing. Do it often and break up different scenarios so that you are, honing in on perfecting that specific aspect of the call.
Love it. All right, what's next?
And that brings us to, so we did do a lot of role playing. Now they get on the phone, make those calls, and we want to break down how did they go. So we do call coaching twice a week. So to do it once with our team lead and then once with myself. And like I said, we also have some live call coaching scenarios that we do during our, we have 2 call blitzes per week. And so we'll also do that. But I think it's important. A couple important things are keep a scorecard, right? You want to track their progress over the onboarding period. And you don't want to have to be talking about some of the same issues. Hey, you had trouble overcoming this objection. Here's some thoughts on how to do that better. You don't want to have to be, talking about that same issue multiple times. You want them to implement. And so definitely keep a scorecard to track progress. And then the other thing I think is really important, but we often don't think a lot about, is creating an environment where they feel comfortable to share bad calls. I see it so often where we have call coaching sessions and I say, bring me your best call, bring me your worst call. And they bring me their worst call and it's like, it's a really good call.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're not learning if we're
Yeah.
not doing that. And so I said very early on, even for our best reps, hey, listen to them fail. Listen to them get tripped up over their words. And they've been doing this for 9 months.
Yeah.
And so what happened then is we created that culture of like, it's okay to have a bad call. And then our new reps would start sharing recordings of their calls in the team channel to then get reviewed by the entire team and say, hey,
Yeah.
I just fumbled on this call. Please, somebody give me
Yeah.
a hand here.
Well, and I think that for any fast growing company, just like with the welcome wagons, which I think, onboarding this group sort of taught us how to be better just as a hybrid work environment and culture. I think the call coaching and what we can learn from just the vulnerability, to use that word, of this SDR cohort has been really refreshing, because when you're moving super fast, I've been working in SaaS for a really long time. I make horrible, stupid mistakes all the time. And it's okay. And I should feel comfortable enough to be like, hey, I messed up. Let's figure out how to make this better. And so I think that it's really neat that you're not just doing that for the calls, but really, I think, instilling a base layer of just like humility and like, hey, we want to be better. We want to be excellent, not just look good for, the boss or that kind of thing. So I think that's awesome.
Exactly. All right. So nail the call coaching, nail the role playing. The next thing is find ways for your new reps to compete. Obviously at Ambition, we love Ambition. We've got, tons of capabilities around spinning up quick competitions and flexibility there. But yeah, I would say compete early on. It may feel counterintuitive because they're just getting started and it's hard to have them compete with some of the more veteran reps, but you can certainly get creative, especially with those metrics they have a lot of control over, like their activities. So early on, they can compete with the veterans around number of calls made, call connect, metrics like that. And so certainly get creative, get flexible here, pit the new reps versus the old reps, pair the old rep with a new rep, do an individual competition. We do call blitzes every week, 2 times a week. So that provides a really great time for those new reps to put into practice all the things that we've been going over. And start to compete, start seeing themselves climb up the leaderboard on the team. And so, yeah, I think that's a really important part. A lot of people say, let's hold off to do competitions until they're fully ramped. But we saw a ton of gains from being able to have those reps compete early on and really stretch themselves to see if they could compete.
Well, and it's got to feel so gratifying. So, I mean, actually, this example that you see here. So Andy we call him the GOAT. I mean, he's He is the template. He's a very experienced, tenured sort of SDR, and he's just naturally very, very good at that job. So it's been really fun. Specifically, Nate has been killing it too. So it's got to feel so gratifying to know that like this is the bar, and then to see yourself do better than him, like that's got to feel like such a win.
Yeah, exactly. And another point that I make here, I think it is important, is we kind of have transitioned to, with the newer reps, to more daily and weekly competitions as opposed to a month or a quarter, just because we know their abilities are changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And so the competition types and the metrics we use are going to change. And so I would say look at some of the competitions for the new reps as a little bit more of these shorter sprints.
Yeah.
To boost the behaviors that you want, and then quickly move on to, hey, they've mastered the activities. Like, let's start getting to some of those objectives.
Nice.
All right. So after competitions, we want to test them out and have some certifications just to verify that, hey, we just spent 2 hours on going over buyer personas. Do you feel, confident knowing everything you should know about those buyer personas? And so how we approach certifications, I looked at 3 categories. So being really comfortable with what are you selling, who are you selling to, and how you sell it. And so those were kind of the categories of certifications that we had. So within what are you selling, it's a lot of product knowledge, getting really comfortable with the features and benefits of our tool. And then who are you selling to? So really understand the buyer personas, ICPs, understand what pains we are solving for those individuals and those companies. And then how do you sell it? So this goes into all of our processes around prospecting, personalization. We do pitch contests to make sure that they have their 20-second pitch nailed, and then also their like 45-second pitch nailed. And so those are some of the things that we look at from a certification standpoint. Another suggestion that I have is do both a written certification and a verbal test, right? So, there's certain things that you can test them out, their level of knowledge around, just given a written test. But then there's other things that you want to test out more from a verbal standpoint. So, all right, Jamie, here's an objection that we get commonly on X. I want you to overcome it here in 30 seconds, right? So that capability is a lot different than a written test. So I think while it can be scary for the reps to be tested out on certain areas, it's really important that we verify, okay, they've grasped this level of knowledge.
And what happens if I don't? So let's say, honestly, very likely that I wouldn't. So I'm not a good test taker. I get tripped up. I'm nervous in this kind of false environment. What happens if I don't pass? Do I have to do stuff? Like, I'm sure that has not happened yet, but well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, one of the cool things about Ambition's product is we have what's called action plans. And so we locate an area that Jamie needs a little bit more help in. Let's create an action plan around it and say, hey, it might be role playing. It might be her grasp of X buyer persona. So let's create an action plan around that and figure out, does it take more time together? Does it take you spending more time listening to calls, learning more about that certain subject? So that's kind of how we would address it, and just make sure that you begin building up more of a comfort level with that. And then we'd have another test out.
I'm going to ace it. Don't give up on me.
Would be a great SDR, Jamie.
Hey, thank you. Oh man, I love this webinar. All right, what's number 9?
All right. So 9. So we want to obviously track how they're performing in the life cycle of their onboarding. And what I've shown you is a screenshot of a tracker that I built specifically for our leadership team to be able to assess every rep's performance over that 90-day period. And really that just helps us locate what are some areas that they're struggling in, where we can, in the next 90 days, really focus on helping them improve. So don't look too deeply. None of these numbers are exactly correct, but it gives you,
Just like green, red, green, red.
yeah, it gives you an idea of what are some of the things that we actually look at. So at the top, we're going to be looking at a lot of activity metrics, and then as it goes down, we'll be looking at more of those outcomes. So you'll see the bolded numbers on the left would be how many meetings they're setting, how many of those meetings hold, how many of those meetings turn to pipeline, and then how many pipeline dollars come from that opportunity. And so then when we look at the bottom, it's going to look at the different rates for each rep. So their conversion rates, their connect rates, meeting held rates. And what I've done here with the green and the red is just highlighted who's the leader in that category and who's last in that category. And so we can see, you know, for rep number 2, they've got a great connect rate, great hold rate, but they just, you know, need to improve maybe their conversion rate on you know, all of their activities. And so I think this gives you a really cool high level view on how are we doing onboarding them, and then in the next 90 days, what are some of the things we need to focus on to help make these reps, you know, A players.
Love it.
Yeah. All right, and then our last point, it's a great send off here, but set the bar really high. I think a lot of times it can be easy to say, these are new reps, we'll give them time to develop. We won't have high expectations for them. You know, after their 90 days, we'll really hold their feet to the fire. And I think that really is a miss. Early on, it's so important to set the right standard for them, set the bar high. And I think you will be surprised at what you see come out of that. One of the examples that we've been using a lot recently, but I think it clearly highlights this point is we have now what's called the street pot. And essentially it's on any day when a rep sets 4 meetings in one day, they're going to win a pot of money that other reps and other people in the company have contributed to over time.
Yeah.
And I think what's the important point there is before we put the street pot in place, I think someone had only set 4 meetings in a day once, right? And then after we set the street pot in place,
it's every day.
I think it was April we set it in place. We've had 5 or 6 of those happen. And I think there's just a ton of power and value in setting that bar high and saying, yes, you can hit 4 meetings in one day. It's doable. And once you get to that 3rd meeting set, you're like, I've got to get 4. This is inevitable. Like,
right. Well, I think that's such a great point to bring up the street pots. So the way that those have been working, or the way that they worked initially, it was a very organic, very cool, fun thing. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Andy, let's say it was. And, you know, he suddenly had 3 meetings and we're like, well, what if he could get 4? And everyone, myself included, you know, CS, engineering, even people are going, well, I'll put $20 in, I'll put $20 in. And it just happened that way. And so now I feel like every other day, I feel like I'm Venmoing a different SDR. My partner's like, who is Nate Taylor? Why are you sending him $20?
Yeah.
But it's so fun because it brings the entire company into it, which has got to just feel so fun for them and make it higher stakes. Like, man, this is my like reputation on the line too. It's not just, you know, that they're competing with somebody else, or it's like this false kind of thing. It's like everybody gets super jazzed about it, and it's great. I love it.
Yeah. In the moment that one of our newer reps, Nate was the first of our reps that hit 4. You know, it just allows the other reps who are onboarding to know, hey, I can do that. Like that's certainly achievable. And so that's really helped their mentality of setting really high expectations for themselves and knowing that they can do it.
Absolutely. Well, we got a couple of questions, so we'll get to those. If anyone else has anything else, let us know. But the first question I have, and actually I'm just curious too, where we got everyone. Where do you find reliable rock star SDRs to hire, and what are qualities that we should look for?
It's a great question, and it's not easy. It's an art. It's a little bit more of an art than a science.
Yeah.
Um, I will say we tried something new. So we did go through our normal channels like LinkedIn, and just one-on-one referrals, things like that, to find great SDRs. But we also partnered with a group called Vendition, to help source and train some of our new reps. And so that has been a helpful avenue for finding good talent. And then, to your question around what are some of the traits you're looking for, you definitely want someone who is coachable, who is somewhat fearless. I think early on, having that confidence to just like fail and just jump in is really important. And then, yeah, fast learners. I think that's one of the biggest things that's really important for an SDR who's onboarding.
And I'm sure that, sort of milestones and assessments along the way help determine if that person's going to make it long term. Next question. I feel like every SDR wants to be an AE. How do you determine who's good for that path? And how do you help them, or how do you talk somebody into maybe not wanting to explore that? What does sort of a growth path look like beyond onboarding?
Another great question, and love to say that we just last week promoted one of our SDRs into an AE role. So we definitely have that path created. And I think what's important is that you're not afraid to have the conversation early on with your reps. I think some managers don't want to talk about that growth path until they hit a certain level in their SDR career, and then it feels comfortable to talk about them moving out of the role. But the reality is, these reps know that they want to use this experience, parlay that into an AE role. So you need to have the conversation early on about what we need to see from a performance standpoint and what that path looks like at our company. I love, even early on, in their tenure as an SDR, to expose them to what it's like to be an AE. And a lot of times what you'll find is they'll recognize that, hey, instead of like wanting to be promoted at 9 months, I'd rather stay around for a little longer in an SDR role to make sure that I'm fully prepared for what it takes to be a successful AE.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to, one, have those conversations early on, set clear expectations, and then just help them as much as possible. Connect them with people who have gone on that path to AE. Connect them with people who have gone to a CSM role. Compare and contrast what those destinations are like.
Absolutely. Or perhaps into a leadership role, but not at Ambition, because because don't come for Chris.
As we grow more, I'd love to have other leaders. So
I wish I had like the Jeffersons theme song, just like moving on up. But I don't have sound cues. But we are out of time. Chris, this was super helpful. I know more now about our onboarding process, but I think this is a really solid plan. We will we'll put the recording together for you. We'll also just try to list out and share these slides and share maybe some other resources, like some gamification resources that have some really fun ideas, because Chris, outside of just being a great leader, is also really creative, and his team does some super fun and funny ideas around these contests that make them not just functionally the right thing to do, but just actually really, really fun. So we'll share all of that with you. And thanks, Chris. Keep doing what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for everybody for attending. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, hit me up there. Happy to share some of these resources and help out along the way.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good day, guys.